Okay, rulers, settle down. Ruler School is brought to you by Odyssey Games, where you can go to get pre-orders of all the upcoming Force of Will sets, as well as releases of previous sets after they come out. CCGprime.com with over 100,000 Force of Will singles, as well as out-of-print boxes from the past, and TCG accessories, as well as FoulLibrary.com, a wonderful resource for deck lists, article discussions, and more. Check them out at FoulLibrary.com, as well as these amazing patrons. Special thanks to guest lecturer patrons Shukong Fu, Vite Ramen, and Maxime Van He. Thank you for your support. Class is in session.
Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to our final yearbook episode for the multi-attribute cards that you need if you're going to play Wanderer format this August. So we took the top 20 cards we could possibly find and added them into this tier list maker, and we are going to be compiling those for you. There's going to be a randomized list down below, so try and guess and figure out what exactly each of these cards, how it's going to be slotted into this list as you go through this with me. And with all of that, let's get going. So first of all, our top 20 card is going to be Millenia Bond. So the number 20 spot is Millenia Bond because it is one of the only cancel spells in the game that actually cantrips and gives you a card once you cancel something, which is really nice. So it is a 2-drop. It is a blue and green card that has 2 modes. You can either cheat in a treasury item from your hand that is 3 cost or lower, I believe, and then you can also the other mode is going to be to cancel a target chant your opponent controls, and then you draw a card. If you have a water and a wind resonator, you can choose both, but oftentimes you're just going to choose one mode or the other, more often than not the cancel side of this chant. So the reason this is at number 20 is sheerly for the fact that it is just one of the cancels that cantrips. It's just that good. It's in some wonky colors, but for the most part, this card, whenever it has been a part of the metagame, has been really powerful and really useful as a utility option. So for that reason, it is at number 20. Next up on the list, we have Barrier Seal, if my computer wants to work, that is. So Barrier Seal is another interesting addition that we had from earlier in the game's history, right around the same time that we got Millenia Bond. So Barrier Seal, it is for red and white. It removes all the graveyards from the game, and then if a card would be put into the graveyard, it is removed from the game instead. And how often do we have decks that just love their graveyard and love to remove things from their graveyard to reduce their cost effects, like in Violet, or for other reasons? Barrier Seal is just a really good way of dealing with those things for 2 mana. It doesn't have quick cast, and it's not a 1 cost, so Geryon doesn't cancel it. So it has to be a regular cancel that cancels it. So which, I don't know how many of those are actually running around in the metagame right now. But the top spot on this list would be able to deal with it, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Anyway, Barrier Seal is just a really good floodgate card in that it can stop your opponent from just doing wonky things with their graveyard, so that's why it's at number 19. Next up, we have another addition, Attoractia, City of Verdant Green. It's a really solid mid-range aggro card that allows you to tap it to pay green to produce a green or produce a red. If you use the green to play a resonator, it gets flying. If you use the red to play a resonator, it gets swiftness. And that doesn't mean you have to use it for a resonator. It just, that's the bonus you get when you actually do. The fact that it's just a magic stone, essentially, and it's an addition, which means it can get removed a little bit more easily than a magic stone would be able to, makes this card relatively balanced, and that's why it's a little bit lower on the list. But just like Barrier Seal, you can't Faria spell this. You also can't Geryon this card, so that already is putting it in a very good spot. And the fact that it just allows your stuff to either fly over or attack as soon as it comes right into the board, this card is pretty decent, which is why it's at number 18. Next, we have one of the strongest cards that we saw out of the DBV era, Perfect Loki. Now, I'm going to tell you why this card is so low on the list first, and that's mostly because we're not seeing a ton of milling into the graveyard from decks that really want that, right? Harvesting season has been kind of out of play, It has not been seeing a lot of play, as most rune rulers haven't as well. There are other, cards that are coming that will mill from the top of your deck into the graveyard. But that being said, the reason Perfect Loki is so good is if you do have a state in which your graveyard is very, very full, or you've milled your graveyard in order for it to be full, Perfect Loki is really good. The reason it's so low on the list is because those kind of decks are just not in the metagame right now, but that could change as we go further into the Wanderer format. Next up, we have one of the favorite boss cards of DPV once again, Alice, Zeus, Incarnate. This card has a lot of wonky things that you can do with it. It facilitates a deck in Alice Palace, where if you have Diversity Town on the field, this thing just kind of boosts your entire field into ridiculous places in terms of attack and defense value. This card is wild, especially in the Adam Psychart deck, which again is a rune deck, but it can use things like the Adam Psychart Resonator, this card, and Dark Alice the Rabbit Princess to kind of give your board a really solid resonator that can be difficult to remove if you have the right cards. It's a really good rogue strategy when I think, the fact that we're getting just more cards and more things that can make use of this. There are ways to cheat this thing into the field that you may not have even thought about, but it rewards creative players in my opinion. So that's why it's at number 16 on this list. Going up next, we actually have a twofer. This is going to be the only twofer that we have for this particular list, but that is going to be Faria and first Boon Cassius. Now, the reason this card is so decent is because you can cheat it out with Faurecia, and then your control deck all of a sudden turns on because you have all of these cards that essentially give you +2 in card advantage for free. And it's quick cast, which means you can play it on your opponent's turn too, and that is just an amazing effect. I've seen this card being used really effectively in Kaguya decks. I'm sure Tree 2 can make use of it because those cards are removed, so there's other things you can do with them in that way. And then Faria on her own is just a really solid resonator, being able to drain for the damage that's prevented, which is really nice. So she prevents the first damage, then you gain the amount of damage she would have taken, which is really nice. It's like a reverse drain almost. So Faria in general is really good, and then she gets even better with the Cassius package. So we're putting that package, that engine, at number 15 on this list. Next up, we have one of the better removal options in the Wanderer format as of right now. That is Lumia, Princess of Rebirth, / Winds of Light and Darkness. So Lumia on her own, when she enters the field, she resets your life based on how much damage you've taken up to the point that she's been on the field, and then you draw a card off of her, which is already a decent effect at quick cast speed. But then she also has a removal option in that you can exile a 2-cost or lower on your opponent's field and then put Lumia into the field, which means you not only heal the damage, you get a card, your opponent loses a card, and you lose nothing. You just replace Lumia in your hand, which is really powerful, in my opinion. And because she removes something from the game, she kind of gets around Barrier 2, which we don't have a lot of effects like that in the current game. So this card is actually pretty darn decent if you can splash into those colors, which is why she's a number 14 on this list. Next up, we have the original green-black Faurecia. This is one of the only resonators in the game that has flying barrier and is a 2-cost. The fact that it also has all of this high utility and that you can discard cards to either pump or neg is really strong as well. She has a cost reduction effect as well, but that's not really that relevant. You're mostly playing this resonator because it has decent stats, it's on curve for a 2-drop, and then it has barrier and flying, which is wild. So for all of those reasons and more, Faurecia is at number 13 on this list. Next up, we have one of the quintessential aggro cards on this list, and that is going to be whatever it is when it finally gets there. Sylvia, Blade of the Supreme King. When this card came out, it essentially replaced Lancelot, the Mad King Demon Knight thing that came out in the original Alice cluster. And the reason is because it's the same cost, although a little bit harder to play because it is in a second color, but it's got swiftness, and then when it attacks, unlike Lancelot, it can prevent your opponent from blocking with something. So you can definitely get in 600 damage. We have resonance cards now that increase your board state in terms of stats. So this card actually has, in my opinion, some validity in the metagame, especially in the Prisia Resonance package. This card is really strong, and it can help you to get in the damage that you need to go for game. So that's why she's at number 12 on this list. Next up, we have the recent Schödinger card. So Schödinger is an interesting card in that it can flicker regalia, resonators, other additions on your side of the field at quick cast speed, and then it can become a resonator if you're employing the light and darkness crystals that come with the Dark Alice from Alice Origins. For all of that reason, Schödinger is interesting. Schödinger, however you want to say. Sorry about that. Schödinger is interesting for those reasons in particular. The fact that it's an addition and it becomes a resonator means it can get around some board negs, which is really helpful. But then it really gets a boost from the fact that Dark Alice, as a ruler, where this card is going to be the best support, has actually gotten some interesting fairy tales recently. So the fact that you can play fairy tales with Dark Alice and this card gives you some interesting synergies. So that's why this card is so high up on this list. Next up, we have one of the more recent cards from the end of Saga Cluster, and that is Castle of Beatrice. So we're in Wanderer, which means that you can play Mikage Rhea, which means you can mill this to the graveyard, which means now you have access at any given time to recur any resonator in your graveyard and put it back in your hand, right? So this card is really good for that particular reason, because Laurite is a card. You can recycle your Laurites, your boss monsters, your other key components. You can even recycle Mikage Rhea. So this card is interesting in that way. So that's why it's so high up on this list. It also protects your graveyard, which is super relevant, in the Wanderer format, because you have things like Evil Elemental Uprising and Burial Rites and the aforementioned Barrier Seal. This card is really good at just protecting your graveyard and your recursion strategies. So that's why Castle of Beatrice is so high up on this list at number 10. Next up, we have more Fox support in Griphon. So Griphon is the quintessential Fox card that you want to be playing as soon as possible to ramp up your stones. And it's one of those cards that also has flying and decent stats when you do have it. In combination with the next card, a Part of True Power, you can recur it from the graveyard. It's protected by Castle of Beatrice, and so you're able to continually have this loop of Griffins to ramp you ahead. And the fact that you can just get stones off of this thing, for a while it had Griffin banned until the metagame was powerful enough for it to be reintroduced. So that's why Griffin, but especially Part of True Power, is on this list too, because it's again got applications of Mikage Rhea, and it's got remnants, so you can use it in the graveyard too, and you can transform any of your smaller darkness cards into a Griffin, including your Mikage Rhea, which just replaces itself. So it's just a really good, strong core of cards that all have applications outside of their respective deck, but they all work together too. So if you're a Fox player, you should be excited. Anyway, let's move on now to number 7 on this list, because Part of True Power was number 8. We're going to be looking at Final Stance. I said we're going to be looking at Final Stance. Work, computer. Thank you. Finally got it to work. Okay. Final Stance. The reason Final Stance is so high on this list is in particular because of Almirius and Mikage Rhea, right? This is kind of like the Mikage Rhea section of the list. Like, if Mikage Rhea can mill this card and get benefits off of it, it's going to be right here because she is just one of the strongest Darkness Resonators ever printed. Final Stance in particular counts as a Darkness card and a Light card. So when you send it to the graveyard with Mikage Rhea, you can revive it later with Almirius to take another turn, which maybe I need to tell you this. That's a really powerful effect in this game. and just taking another turn on its own is powerful. So that's why it's at number 7 on this list. After that, we have Magna's Guardian Beast. Of all of the 3-drop resonators that helps you to get your fun 1-drops out of the deck, Magna's Guardian Beast is that card. Another comparable card would be Scheherazade from the MSW set, in that it gets you a 1-cost resonator and a 1-cost addition, but you have to awaken it. So I think Magna is just a little bit better in that regard, which is why it makes the list. So there are tons of 1-drop flood support cards that came out in dual cluster, that being Lycion Guard, Witch of the Black, Witch of the Fallen Kingdom, Pointy Hat Witch. It can grab Lorite. It can grab just a ton of different cards out of your deck to do interesting and powerful things with. It does suffer a little bit because Carlina is now banned in Wanderer. So it's a little unfortunate that this card fell from grace a little bit, but still the fact that it even gets your 1-drops, even though it's in the top 6 to 10 region of this list, it's still incredibly powerful for the decks that you want to be playing. So here you go, Magna's Guardian Beast, number 6. Next up, we have one of my favorite cards from Rhea Cluster that I just got recently because they were wicked expensive. That is going to be a Heroic Epic for the Thousandth Night. Don't try and say the whole name. The Heroic Epic is a ridiculous card name on its own. But for 3, you can cheat in any card from your hand, and then it goes back to your hand at the end of the turn. This is one of the cards that was useful in the Umer at Tawil, the Keymaster combo, wherein you put in Umer, you got a whole bunch of cards from the game, you flickered an Umer out, and then you just got a giant board, and it was all because this card had just so much application in that deck. We got rid of Umer, but this card still exists, and we do have really strong, big resonators that would benefit from this card being used in combination with it. One of those being Griphon, which I don't know why you would ever have that in your hand, but sometimes you do, or even Magna's Guardian Beast, or some other cards that are available in the format that go really well in terms of synergy with this. It is in some awkward colors though. It is in red and black, but we're in Wanderer format, so you're able to, play certain stones that you wouldn't be able to play otherwise in order to make better use of this card. This card has a lot of bonkers things going for it, and I love it, so it's at number 5 on this list. Alright, and now we're moving into number 4, which is Inferno. Give it a sec. Gosh, Inferno. So Inferno is a really powerful card in that it can just be directly tutored with cards like Asthma. It can set your life down to it can set your opponent's life down to what you are at. I cannot speak today. It just has so many different modes. You can play it at quick cast speed if it has Fallen. You can choose all 3 modes if your ruler is Asthma, and it's just a big threat. Before Carlina got banned, one of the most powerful things about the Order Killer deck that we like here on the channel is that you can tutor this card at any given time, and so it's always live and it's always a threat, especially with Carlina being able to pay its full cost. That's changed a little bit because Carlina has been banned, but even so, there are tons of decks, especially control decks, that would really, you would benefit from playing this card against them. So this card has a lot of applications, and if it doesn't have quick cast, it can't be Geryoned and it can't be Fairer Spelled, which is really good news for you. So Inferno is definitely on this list. It is super good. I cannot recommend this card more. This card equals out so many different matchups if you're able to run it in color. Next up, we have one of my favorite cards, and I mentioned it a lot in this video, Geryon. So Geryon is a big boy. If you're able to play him as a resonator, he is a 5-drop, so good luck doing that, but it is known to happen every once in a while, especially in decks that can cheat him out. He basically prevents your opponent from playing 1-drops, which is really good. 1-drops are some of the best cards in the entire game. And then if you want to use any of his activate abilities in hand, for green you can cancel a 1-drop card that your opponent's putting on the chase, or for 1 black you can destroy and remove I one-drop Resonator your opponent controls from the game. First, you have to remove Geryon to do that, and he's not a Chimera, so Fox players are a little sad, but this card is shaping the metagame going into the Wanderer format here in August. You're going to see this as part of the cancel suite, I guarantee it, as you go into that. Next up, I definitely think this was a biased pick on my part, but I love this card. And this card, for me, is just one of the best additions of all time. That is Magic Stone Research Institute. Again, because we don't have Sigurd, this card is a little less consistent. But the fact that I just think this card has so many ways in which it can benefit certain rogue decks, certain meta decks can make use of this card. It does things to counter the Violet matchup. This card is just fantastic, and it makes all of your smaller resonators just bigger for every different stone that you have. And as we're going into Wanderer, you're always going to have multiple stones with different names, just because that's how the game is in an internal format. Magic Stone Research Institute, for me, is one of the staples in my Kaguya list, which is the Black Kaguya list that Jeremy put up on the channel a little while ago, his own take on that. But I absolutely love Institute. It's probably one of my favorite cards of all time, and the joke on the channel, for us anyway, is Paul will put this into any deck he possibly can, and you're not wrong. Last but not least, if you can see it, you know it's there. The best card, we think right now, the best multi-attribute card in Wanderer is probably going to be number 13, Anti-Magic. This card and Seal of Wind and Light are kind of your quintessential cancel spells. Number 13 specifically because it gets cheaper, especially when you play it in Fox or any other deck that can ramp stones very quickly. This card has a lot of applications and can get cheaper. It is still a 2-drop when you cast it. You just have to pay less for it, which means that Geryon can't stop it. It can be canceled by Faira's spell and, other cancel spells that stop this. But this is the card, this is the premium gold plated card that you definitely want to have a playset of as you go into the Wanderer format. But that being said, guys, this has been Paul. This is the end of the top 20 list series that we have going into Wanderer format here in August. Let me know what you guys think of this list down in the comment section down below. Hit that like button, hit subscribe and the bell if you want more videos like this, and let me know if there's any cards that you would have included on this list. I'm very curious to know because there's so many good multi-attribute cards in the game of Force of Will. With that being said, guys, I've been Paul, and I'll catch you next time.